All right, guys, and welcome. This is your third exercise of the workout. This is the reverse banded hack squat. And before we jump into all the fancy stuff about the band, which really isn't that fancy, people just tend to overcomplicate it and think it's some kind of magic potion, and it's really not. You have to realize that if the fundamentals of your squat, particularly your squat here in the hack squat, is garbage, how do you expect it to carry over and be effective when you put a band on? It's not going to automatically make your squat good. The band is simply just a tool to make the squat more efficient for the range of motion provided, and that's it. Outside of that, your mechanics are going to be the thing that takes you the furthest. It's the thing that's going to carry you through making this exercise something that's mediocre to something that's really, really great. And how do we do so? Well, first of all, we have to know the purpose, like always. Why are we here in this hack squat? Well, we've transitioned from doing two hamstring exercises, both leg curl variations for the most part, that are found in most gyms with the exception of like a standing leg curl. And we've gone into something that is now for the quads. And that is the major importance, the big thing you need to wrap your head around is that we're doing this for quads. Could you make it more hip-based? Absolutely. But we want to make this as biased as we can for the quads, and even more specific for the quads in a fully lengthened position. Now, not anatomically as lengthened as they possibly could be, but pretty close to as lengthened as they can be around the knee. So with that being in mind, we have to realize that a lengthened quad around the knee is as close to being like your hamstring or the back of your leg on your calf as you possibly can be. Are you going to be able to get there? I don't know. I can't answer that. There's a couple variables that factor in. Your structure. Your structure could keep you from being able to get to that point. Your mobility, the mobility of your ankles, your hips, and your knees could keep you from getting to that point, okay? And your strength. How strong are you in a lengthened position? If you're very, very weak and can't even produce any force or any tension in a completely lengthened quad right now, when we get into a machine, actually loaded, you may not have no merit in going there. In fact, you may have no merit even in training here. If I'm being really picky, you may have to do body weight stuff. You may have to do isometrics of holding that fully lengthened position. So what we're looking for, honestly, is just this as much as we can without any kind of hip movement happening, okay? But a lot of stuff factors in here. This can be just as equally challenging as any free weight squat that you do because it's fixed. So you have to fit the machine. And the other two leg curl variations, I was giving you points and tips on how you fit the machine, how the machine doesn't automatically fit to you. And you need to do the same here. And the easiest way to kind of wrap your head around that is to understand your contact points and how do we utilize those, okay? So the contact points are the things that you're in hardest contact with, you're pushing into at a 10 out of 10 throughout the entirety of the set, okay? Let's start with the feet. You have a platform, you have an angled platform. And it doesn't matter the angle. Some angles are very pitched, some angles are a little bit more flat. That's unique to that machine. But regardless, as you go through the range of motion of your squat, your feet should stay flat at all times. There are variations out there of sissy squats where people roll onto their toes at the bottom of the squat. We could argue that gets the quads more lengthened, but we're not looking for that. We're looking for a good balance of stability and load, so feet need to stay flat. That's contact point number one. Contact point number two is the pad behind me, okay? It is this pad here. Now, it is a back pad, but I don't want you to force yourself to getting some part of your back and your hips to drive into that pad that doesn't naturally already do so. So whatever part of your body, whether it's your tailbone or your butt or the mid part of your back that just naturally kind of puts itself into that pad, that's where you're going to be driving into the entire time. That cannot change. If that changes, we have some issues going on in setup as you go through the range of your squat, okay? So how do you know, based off of those two contact points, if your hack squat is off? Well, at the bottom, you'll either have one of two things happen. You'll have the sensation to roll up on your toes, then we need to make an adjustment to the feet. Feet may have to go a little higher or a little wider, and I'll talk about that here in a minute, okay? The second thing with the contact point of number two, okay, you'll have your butt or your hips or whatever's in hardest contact at the bottom of the squat want to come off the pad. So if my pad is angling here and my butt is following that, my butt's gonna want to drift off. And at that point in time, You may have your feet too high. They may have to go lower, or they may have to go narrower and lower, or wider and lower. There's a balance, okay? Now realize that we're living in a period or an area of gray. I cannot give you finite details about your setup. Your setup is unique to you. I know people that can hit quads perfectly with their feet almost together. And then I know other people that can't hit quads hardly at all until their feet are super, super wide. That has to do with the structure of your hips and the mobility of your hips, okay? So we need to cover that a little bit. How do I know what my width needs to be? Well, a lot of times, the way that I start with beginners is I like to get them in the hack squat and just kind of have them naturally just kind of pick their knee up as high as they can, or their thigh up without their hips tilting. So my back pad's here, my butt's against this back pad, back pad. Should say that 10 times fast, okay? And I like to get them to the point where they can't flex at the hip anymore, and then open them up a little bit, see if they can flex a little more, open up a little bit more, and then kind of find that happy medium there and say, just set that foot down. And for most people, it's a little wider than shoulder width. And as we go through the course of our warm-up sets, we're experimenting with that. So realize that your first set you do may not feel perfect. That's what all of these inventory checking sets are for. That's what these build-up sets are for, because we are holding ourselves accountable for nothing less of getting better and getting better and getting better. If things aren't getting better, then we're not going to even get to the working sets, okay? Fundamental things have to be put in place first. So once I have kind of my femur position set, then I have to get an understanding of, based off of the mobility of how well my ankle can move, how low can my feet go on the platform. And so I just have everybody just start safely around mid-platform. And you kind of see how far that knee travels forward out over the toe. And you also see kind of what happens with the pressure of that foot. Again, that foot should stay nice and firm and flat. And you get to the bottom of that squat. The bottom of that squat may be like this. It may be like not all the way here, but it may be here. And then what do? Well, it's like, well, next rep or next set, maybe I just pull that foot down a little more and see if I can get closer to knee flexion. And maybe I pull it down a little more and get closer to knee flexion there. And maybe I pull it down a little more, but as I get to the bottom of my squat, now I lift to my toe. So what I've done is I've gone to the full capacity of how far my ankles can actually move forward or dorsiflex. So the ideal squat for quads, whether it's free weight or a hack squat or a split squat or a lunge variation, when it is quad biased, we're trying to max out dorsiflexion of the ankle, okay, so the shin moving forward, at the same time that hip flexion maxes out. So that means can't flex at my hip anymore, okay? Can't flex at my ankle anymore. So it's like this position we're looking to get. And what that should do is, since that load is back here, okay, it's going down my spine, it should create a heck of a lot of torque around that knee. The more torque we can create around that knee, the more opportunity for your quads to create this force production against that load. And that is your mechanics tutorial. So now, there's more to that. We could get deeper, but that's just to get you started, okay? Now, let's talk about the bands. Why the bands? Well, think about your hack squat without the bands. What's the hardest part of that hack squat? It's the bottom. If you went to the bottom, you had a 45-pound plate aside, and I told you to hold it for 30 seconds without going relaxed or falling, could you do it? Probably not. Now, if I asked you to do the same thing in the middle range, could you do it? Maybe. If I asked you to do it at the top, could you do it? Absolutely. So the bottom of that squat is extremely challenging. And as the knees and the hips get closer to getting into alignment with each other, which we call stacked, okay, the less load that's going through the quads. We call this an imbalanced strength profile for this exercise, okay? What's happening is the bottom's hard and the top's not hard, or the bottom's hard and the top isn't hard at all. And since that is like that, that means basically I'm working hardest at the bottom, and as I go up and ascend, I'm working less and less and less and less hard throughout the entire that range of motion. Wouldn't it be awesome if we could work equally hard throughout every degree of knee flexing and knee extending of this squat? Yeah, it would, because what that means is less sets needed, less overall reps needed, and higher quality of force production every single repetition in terms of creating a demand of energy usage or muscular damage or systemic overload, things of that nature that stuff can really matter. And that's what we're doing here, okay? So the band, essentially, when I set it up, at the top here, I don't know if you can see it, these bands are completely slack, all right? This is a reverse band. The same thing can be for a regular band. If I took a band and wrapped it around here and it was pulling me down. The only difference between a reverse band and a band is the direction that band is pulling. One, the band is pulling you into the bottom of the squat. This example, the band is helping you a bit in the bottom of the squat. Okay, it's kind of easing you to the bottom of the squat, which is why a lot of times I prefer, from a control standpoint, to use the reverse band, because it helps people learn how to get comfortable in the bottom of that squat still while we're here, whether we have the band or not. It's to master and spend time in that knee flexed bottom position. Okay, let's get back on track. So if I'm at the top of this squat with this band, and this band is completely slacked, we all can agree as I go lower and lower and lower in my squat, the band's going to stretch out more and more and more and more. All right? So let's say that this is 400 pounds at the top, and as I go down, it's 200 pounds at the bottom. And let's say that my traditional hack squat was 200 pounds at the top, and what I could tolerate was 200 pounds at the bottom. Can you already see how things are shifting there? All right? My quads can only tolerate in the bottom 200 pounds, but maybe in the mid-range they could tolerate 300 pounds. And maybe towards the top they could tolerate 400 pounds. So that's what that band does. It changes the amount of load going down through your body to match what it can produce in force, okay? It's a mathematical equation we could draw on a board, but the important part that you have to realize is that the band has to really help you in the bottom, and it has to really deload at the top. So if I put just one little skinny band on there, and it was just giving me 20, 30 pounds of help in the bottom, that's not a large enough change. It's not a large enough discrepancy to systemically make anything seem different. I'm not really changing the profile of this exercise at all. So my advice to you is be aggressive with the band. If you're overly aggressive with how thick the band is, the second set you can always change it. But if you're conservative with the band, okay, you're going to take away the purpose of why we're even adding this tool in the first place. And you might as well just do traditional hack squat. Okay, so just in review, guys, completely deloaded in the top, band should be completely slack. Should go completely slack in the last couple inches, maybe a little bit more. And that band should be heavily loaded in the bottom. It should almost guide you into those bottom couple inches of that squat so you can pause, contract, and drive. And as you drive, if the bands are set up properly, you're going to grind at that top in those last couple repetitions. Okay, that's the sign of a pretty good profile. You'll actually struggle in the range of motion where you're most strong, which is in the top half, which is an awesome, awesome setup, okay? So this is a great exercise, but I want to really emphasize and I want to remind you that the bands come last, okay? I want you to put them on right away. I want you to use them, but if you don't have the mechanics of what the best quad dominant squat is for you in this hack squat, if you're playing around with that all the time, then you might as well not even worry about the bands, okay? So take as many warm-up sets, inventory check sets that it takes to find your squat stance. It may be narrow, maybe femur slightly open, it may be narrow with feet high, narrow with feet low, wide with feet high, wide with feet low. You don't know until you get in and actually play. But what we're trying to do is max out our dorsiflexion, our ankle moving forward at the same time that our hip flexion maxes out. That's the perfect scenario. Will it be like that for every one of you guys? I don't 100% know, but get as close as you possibly can, okay? So this was a fun video, guys. This is an exercise that we could really, really talk a long time about because it's that good of an exercise. This should be a staple in your training if you have access to a hack squat. And if you don't have access to a hack squat, you can take the same mechanics that's the same examples of mechanics, the same tips that I gave you for setting up your hack squat and carry them over to some form of a barbell squat for quads. Even if you have a heel elevation for a quad dominant squat, you could kind of substitute that, at least in today's program, in place of the hack squat if you don't have access to that. Okay, so the next video will be coming up. We're going to be talking, I believe, I don't know what we're going to be talking about. I have to look at the workout again. I can't really remember, but that will be soon to come. Thanks for tuning in, guys, and we'll talk soon.